You want me to carry on with my rant? The court of the dragon was brought over by Melusine when she fled from Scotland. What had happened was that her mother, who was the daughter of the Scythian elven king Prieuré MacBile, this daughter had married a Dalriadan king called Elinus, who didn't actually quite get the point. There's this kind of recurring tradition here that he had broken Scythian taboo and had in fact dishonoured his wife. And the reaction from Melusine was ritual murder. She could not countenance the idea that her father had done such a thing to her mother. So what she did is she bricked him up in a cave in Berenicia in Northumberland, and you will see various references and various rituals associated with that particular part of the country which verify the story that he was actually made, if you like, an anchorite. In any event, she was guilty of ritual murder, and so she fled to Avalon, the Isle of Arran, and took a ship down south to France and hooked up with another Pictish cousin, Rainfroy, and they started the Court of the Dragon in Anjou from that point onwards, which was about 769, I believe. After that, the House of Luxembourg attributed their own descent to my first ancestor in France and started to say that they were, descended from her and so on. When in fact it has been proved that they had no descent from her at all. Now this is retrospective, and the reason for it is because they wanted to have some kind of legitimate succession for their own dragon court in 1408. And so they changed their descent to include Melusine as the first dragon princess of Anjou. Let's forgive them for that. Now, I'm a cousin of Sigismund anyway, so, it's all water under the bridge. But the point is that the first dragon court actually was started by Melusine and Rainfroy de Vere in around about 769 in Anjou, when Anjou was arguably still a kingdom. From them, we have the first great descendant of the House of Vere, Milo. He was, as you will find in James Anderson's book, The Royal Founders of Europe, he was the Duke of Angers and the first Count of Anjou. That is something that's got me into a large amount of trouble, which we'll hear about later. I didn't realise, but there you go. You tell the truth, people don't like it. However, so the actual dragon court descends not through the House of Luxembourg, it descends through the House of Vere. However, Sigismund in 1397 initiated the first foundations of the Dragon Court in Hungary. From there, we have an amazing history. We can't fault him for it. He did a brilliant job. And out of that, we have the kings of Denmark, Lithuania, various other places, and of course, the guy we're talking about this evening, who is Vlad Dracul and his son Vlad Draculia Tepesh. I hope that answers the question. Talking about the Gaelic peoples, the Scythian peoples, the dragons, basically they have an extra sandwich in their picnic basket. By that, what is meant is that there's just a little something about them which is more capable of seeing reality than other people, all right? And they just need a little bit of a kickstart to get them going in order to individuate themselves, become whole people, and become valuable members of society. The accusations about my cousin. To begin with, his father, Vlad II Dracul, was a ward of the court of King Sigismund. And so therefore Vlad was virtually born and brought up in that mystical tradition. And in order to understand that, you would have to start asking questions about Queen Barbara, Princess Elizabeth, and Emperor Sigismund themselves, and their tutor, and so on. But for the purposes of this conversation, Vlad II was brought up within the court. His son, Vlad III, Dracula, was born in the court. And so therefore they were surrounded by this high alchemical, mystical tradition. Starfire, yeah, I borrowed that from a mate of mine, Kenneth Grant, God rest his soul. He was head of the Sovereign Sanctuary of the Ordo Templi Orientis. And I was, we were discussing things back in the early 90s and so on. And he had coined the phrase Starfire to describe the alchemical process whereby, I think it was Machen said, that a dragon consumes a dragon and becomes a phoenix and alights upon the throne of the world. This is a mystical term for transcendent enlightenment via using dragon blood, or the consumption between the female and male dragon, female and female dragon, whatever, of the blood, in order to get, if you like, a certain kind of high where their minds would be cleared and opened to the perception of life as it really is, rather than life as we assume it. In so doing, the two dragons consume each other and become either a greater dragon or the phoenix that ascends to the throne of the world, to the throne of the universe. That is what Starfire is about. That is what it means. It's that otherworldly energy that infuses the body and the mind to a sufficient extent where it has the capacity to see clearly. And if anybody knows anything about the process of transcendence, it needs a hell of a lot of energy to do it, because the brain works in such a way to exhaust us with all the blockages, with all the brick walls we have, with all the doors that we close within our psyches to prevent us seeing what we truly are. That takes a lot of energy. So Starfire is, in a sense, an encapsulation of the energy that is required to see clearly, to be rid of the doors, rid of the brick walls, rid of the psychoses, rid of, the neurosis and everything, just to wipe all that away and see things as they really are. That is Starfire. Does that make sense? The origin of the word vampire. Vampire is a word that originated in Anatolia, which is now Turkey. I think there's still a region in Turkey called Anatolia. However, Anatolia, before it was Asia Minor, before it was Turkey and so on, was the central meeting point of all the Druid overlords of Eurasia. They would come from Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Galicia, Gaul, Breton, Germany, everywhere, from the Far Eastern countries as well, because there were Druids in China and what is now Afghanistan. There were Druids in India and so on. And the whole lot would all converge on Anatolia every 9 years, I think it was, for what was called the Nemeton, which was the 9-year holy meeting of all the overlords. Okay. Now, what I mean by that is that Druids were dragons. They were the top species. Kings came below them, sometimes dragon, sometimes human, whatever, but they came below the druids. Everyone looked to the druids for their guidance. Everyone obeyed the law of the druids, which is pretty good because they're damn good laws. So, in Anatolia, we have a word, yuba. It's not a Turkish word, it's a Scythian word, which has correlates in German, Russian, Romanian, and Latin. Uber, obviously, as the word infers, means overlord. Now, the way it was interpreted in those days, Uber meant witch. And then by a process of continuation, which we find in Irish is translated as druith or druid. So a witch was a druid, and a druid was an uber or vampire, an overlord. So we're not talking about simply the drinking habits of a particular caste of people. We're talking about their social context and their responsibilities within society. The Druids were the ultimate kings of Eurasia, under which were the sub-kings, whom the Catholic Church later elevated. And the Druids were responsible for the guidance of the people. They were responsible for seeing into the future of the people, for the healing of the people. They had a particular responsibility in society that had to be maintained by what you and I now call vampirism, by the ingestion of blood, which is enriched with neurotransmitters, with hormones, with chemicals that change the pattern of the way that the brain thinks and sees and perceives, in order that they may function properly for their societies. So vampirism, it wasn't practiced with humans and druids or humans and dragons. It was purely a dragon thing. No dragon would prey on a human because the blood was so rubbish it wasn't worth it. So they did it amongst themselves. They kept within their own caste, and they performed their responsible functions as the guides and leaders of their people. That is royal vampirism. It's a social responsibility. But to write them on the hearts of men in tongues of fire, the symbolism, the fire, spirit, transformation, and so on, is exhorting people to follow a true path of understanding in order that their entire lives may be transformed and the actual laws of the universe, if you like, become a completely and utterly natural part of people's lives. They no longer desire or covet their neighbour's ox, ass, GMC, four-wheel drive, whatever. They no longer hate, they no longer despise, they're no longer jealous. They are in touch with the whole universe. They are one with the universe. That is the whole point of it. If you want, I have been a Gnostic Christian for many, many years, and we'll talk about the bullshit that's gone on about me recently. But the point is, I've been a Christian for many, many years. I translate Christian teaching. I can see it in Buddhism, I can see it in Kabbalah, I can see it very much in Islam, in Sufi, and in the Vedas and so on. The message is always basically the same, which is be at one with life. Transform your life by a clear perception of what truly is going on in you and in everything else, because everything else is you as well. There is no division. There is only the oneness and the beauty of life. That is vampirism. Let's have a look at the geography of Hungary. It is in basic Scythian territory, okay? The Hungarians are descended from Attila, who we call Attila the Hun, who is descended from the first anarchy. He's basically a Scythian. His descendants are Scythians. And the situation that we have here is that Hollywood has confused what we call martial vampirism with alchemical or royal vampirism. Now, if you look at any Hollywood film which has a vampire in it, the vampire will be chomping at the neck of some victim or another. Now, this is not vampirism, okay? This is, if you like, what we call martial vampirism. What used to happen with Scythians in central Western Eurasia, Hungary, in Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Gaul, anywhere you find a Scythian, you will find the practice of drinking the blood of the fallen from the neck. And the reason for that practice was, number one, if it was a brother or a cousin who was dying and there was no way of saving them, then their kin would gather around them and drink their blood in order to take into themselves the spirit, the memory, the energy, the virtue, and the courage of that fallen compadre. This is totally different from royal vampirism. But, unfortunately, whenever you get a Hollywood film, you will always get some idiot chomping on the neck of somebody else. And that is called they think that that is vampirism. It isn't. We've got to remember that Bram Stoker was actually a cohort of Arthur Machen, and he was very deeply involved in the mystery schools himself. So, in a sense, he's done what a lot of people have done in the past, which is to bury the pearl of wisdom underneath the mire of misconception, of story, and so on and so on. But, however, if one reads Bram Stoker's Dracula carefully, one will see that there is a story, a vein of truth that comes out of it, which is far deeper than the surface story that Stoker tells. Okay, it's a story of alchemy, of true love, of mysticism, and so on. So let's put to bed once and for all the idea that Stoker's story was a myth. It is a story on the surface, but deep, deep down, it is actually based on truth. But a far more mystical truth than one would accept looking at the surface. I mean, if you're in the midst of a horrendous battle, your cousin has fallen and he's dying, and you know you can't save him, and you want to take something of yourself into him, of himself into you, then that's what you do. I mean, the South American tribes do that when they eat the ashes of their own fallen, blah, blah. However, royal vampirism is utterly, utterly different. And it is very secret. The Welsh sagas of King Arthur and Owain and so on, and you'll get it in the stories of Parzival and his sister, and you'll get it in the songs of the troubadours. Royal vampirism is never conducted with a human. Never. It's totally pointless. Different species, different blood, different psychology, different morphology. They are totally different. There is no point. So this idea of vampires predating on human beings is an absolute bloody nonsense. Okay, no vampire worth his salt would drink human blood. It's like something out of Taco Bell or McDonald's, totally and utterly pointless. Nothing there at all. Royal vampirism was practiced between royal people. You would have Grail maidens trained up who would give their own particular sort of blood to both queens, kings, princes and princesses. And the point of that was because that blood within that particular species contained vast amounts of neurotransmitters and hormones that would be the factors that change consciousness. And in that point, everyone fed off everyone else. You will find this reflected in the story, the songs and the stories of the troubadours in France, in Provençal, in Flanders, and so on, where royal vampirism is seen to be the ultimate dedication, the ultimate expression of divine and true love. So when we're talking about, say, Hollywood, where the vampire is nibbling at the neck of some poor maiden or idiot or whatever, and it's all unwilling and it's all victimization and all that, this is bunkum. It was a tradition that has been carried on for thousands of years. It has been suppressed by the church, suppressed by other authorities and so on. It arose later and emerged in Provence and in Flanders with the troubadours. You have then accompanying that the story of the Holy Grail and the Arthurian sagas and so on. And don't ever make a mistake about this. This is what Bram Stoker was writing about hundreds of years later. This is the true prerequisite, the true source of what real vampirism is about. And before anyone goes all wobbly and falls off their chair or hides behind their sofa, don't you think we ought to discuss what the word vampire actually is and means? The thing is, in the Dragon Legacy, you'll see that it isn't actually a ritual. What it is a psychosomatic preparation. The chakra system or the Sephira system, both the same thing, both came from the Scythians. Basically what it is if you're going to fire up the chakras so you get the whole of the physical system working properly at its optimum rate and state, that is not a ritual. As I said, we get a lot of this from Bram Stoker. And in Bram Stoker's work, you will find an awful lot of alchemical truth. The reason that Bram Stoker said that the Dracula only came out at night was quite simple. The retina, when hit by sunlight, the retina takes that energy back into the pineal gland and so on, and produces serotonin, which is a very active neurotransmitter, keeps us bubbly, keeps us going, and so on and so on. However, if you are looking, you see the whole point of vampirism is leadership, okay? You have to have somebody who has an edge on what is going on in life. And this edge is partly produced by melatonin. Melatonin is the neurotransmitter that is produced mostly at night time. If you go out in the sunlight, what will happen is that the production of melatonin, what they call the wisdom hormone, is completely suppressed and is taken over by the production of serotonin, which is the happy hormone, keeps you buzzing and so on, but keeps you pretty stupid and thick. So there was that aspect to it. The second aspect to it is that anciently, I think Bram Stoker knew that because of the complexion and makeup of Scythian people, which is red hair, green eyes, very pale skin. I think Billy commonly joked that before a Scotsman burns, he goes blue. Scots being Scythians. The thing is that as Scythians, they couldn't go out in the sunlight. They had very little melanin in their blood, and they would fry, which is where you get this nonsense idea of vampires bursting into flames in sunlight. There is a partial truth to it. But those two particular things. Number one, melatonin is only produced in quantity at night, so vampires came out at night. Number two, vampires actually did burn in sunlight because they had no, or virtually no melanin in their blood. This is a northern Scythian thing. So it's kind of based on truth, but it's been over-exaggerated by Hollywood. The origin of that is in Transylvania, possibly a bit earlier in Rome, in Persia. If you look at the various shapes that vampires are supposed to shift into, you will notice that these are the 7 grades of the mystery cult of Mithras. The highest shape shift is the dragon. The second is the wolf, where you get the werewolves from. The third is the Morrigan, or the raven, and you get pig, and I think there's even a bloody vampire rabbit or something ridiculous in the Mithraic cult. But you get the drift. The point is that there are so many grades of vampire according to their initiation within the Mithraic cult, which is in fact the cult of Jesus, etc. So that will upset a few Christians. But there's so many different grades that people have kind of taken a bit of this and a bit of that. They've got confused and they've said, oh, they turn into vampire bats, which is nonsense. There aren't any in Europe. That's a different matter altogether. But they kind of take these little snippets from here and there, and they make up these stories, and then these stories turn up on our screens. Werewolves are different from vampires, which are different from this, or different. No, they're not. They're all the bloody same creature. And what they are is simply Scythian high kings or king tribes who have certain totem animals, and everyone knows about totem animals, or they have certain grades within the mystery schools of Mithras or of Jesus, same thing, or of Pan or Dionysus or whatever, all the same thing. These are grades within mystery schools. Sorry to ramble, but it's been a long day. The thing is, I have a kind of a kind of a comedy scenario about the Anunnaki, but I can't really take them too seriously, reading their histories. And I'm kind of allergic to New Age twits, harking back to times when, nostalgia really was nostalgia, and there were great gods and everything was lovely, blah, blah, blah. It's a load of crap. The point is that the Anunnaki were probably just as confused as we are, probably just as frustrated and annoyed, and you can see that through their writings. They were humanoids. I'm not quite sure. I wouldn't want to say that they were pure vampires in anything but the strictest etymology of the word vampire, which is overlord. Yes, they were certainly that. There is certain evidence that they held rituals before they went to Sumeria, when they were living actually in Tartaria, which is in Transylvania. There are certain evidences which say they did practice vampirism amongst themselves. But what I think is that once they crossbred with the Eljo and produced the likes of Cain and of Adam and so on. It was at that point that vampirism became necessary. As a practice, as a royal mystical rite, it became necessary. Because what you have then is a situation where the Anunnaki haven't got a clue what the monkeys are saying. The monkeys haven't got a clue what the Anunnaki are saying. They're trying to live together and trying to get on with stuff, but nothing is happening. The monkeys are going crazy, the Anunnaki are getting exasperated. So what the Anunnaki say is, bugger it, we're going to produce a hybrid. Grab hold of an Eljo woman, inseminate her, and we'll see what happens. What happened was that the elves were produced. Or, if you wish, the Dragon Kings, the Druids, whatever you want to call them, Scythians, true Scythians, they were produced. But because they weren't pure Anunnaki, there was a need for an ingestion of neurotransmitters and hormones in order that the dragon, fairy, elven, vampire kings could actually do the business they needed to do for the Anunnaki and do the business that they needed to do for the monkeys, Eljos, humans, whatever you want to call them. So you have the situation where the first hermetic god kings were the elves, or the fairies, dragons, vampires, whatever you want, and they actually needed the stuff in order to be able to function, because they were half-breeds. There are only psychosomatic exercises for the production, the optimum production of hormones within the system, okay? By no means could you call these rituals, and you know, when it comes to ritual, I run like a frightened little girl, simply because I think most of it is bunk. And if it doesn't have a physiological effect on the system, for me personally, it's not worth doing. So we have a situation where the rite of the vampire, which I speak about in the Dragon Legacy, is not a ritual, and not some kind of woody ritual per se. What it is simply a mind over matter exercise where the mind increases the production of neurotransmitters from the various glands within the body in order to create an optimum elixir, if you wish, for consumption by a third party. But the point is, I've got to say, in this situation, is that the whole point of it, sorry, not the whole point, but the way it is conducted is in love. If you want to have a look at it, you can see it in the rites of the Lamia, the rites of Ishtar, the rites of Arachne, and so on. These things, this knowledge is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. And the only reason we don't know about it now, and the only reason we may find it repulsive, is because the church suppressed it around about 400 AD. They stomped on the whole thing. They usurped the position, the rightful position of the druids, the dragons, the dragon kings, queens, princes and princesses and so on. And they replaced it with some kind of, uptight, sexually terrified, moral Jewish lot of bunkum that we still suffer from now. If it wasn't for that, then you would probably look at vampirism and go, oh yeah, okay, fair enough, yeah, whatever, let's have another beer. But because it has been excised from human society and human consciousness, instead all we get is the endless rerun of bunkum Hollywood bullshit from people who have no idea what they're talking about.